now I would like to invite a few questions from the floor. His Excellency Dr. George Sampaio has kindly agreed to answer a few questions. So if you've got a few questions, just put your hand up, and can we maybe invite His Excellency on stage?
Your Excellency is Gary Bauman, the UNESCO Chair in Interreligious and Intercultural Relations of the Asia Pacific, and I very much appreciate your remarks today, both this morning and this evening. Given that no small part of our diversity is present here and celebrated in Australia is religious diversity, and given that there are religiously motivated conflicts in the world, and some religious groups seem to find it necessary to use dehumanizing language about those who disagree with them, what role do you see the United Nations and the Alliance taking in promoting proper citizenship of religious groups in the civil societies of the world?
The Alliance is obviously concerned with the impact that religion has on everyday lives of so many people. And I think that the equilibrium which has to be found is precisely, even in secular societies, how is it possible to have a pluralistic view on religion, and at the same time, although this is not the core activities of the Alliance, we do favor, as a new point of what is happening in public space in general, we do favor the necessity to follow and make it advance what I would call the inter-religious, not intra-religious, because that is theology in the proper sense of the word. So I think that by addressing media subjects, addressing the teaching of history, for example, it's amazing to see how at many schools everywhere in the world you don't really understand other religions. You understand your own religion if you have one, but you have no knowledge whatsoever about all the others. This is terrifying. And so teaching of history is something that we are doing with UNESCO and vice versa, to try to see how this can be generalized. I think this is a major point. The other thing is media. I mean, what role are media playing? And this is why there are programs developed on media literacy. You have to be with some tools to understand what is throwing at your faces or to your ears every day, and try to learn how to distinguish what is, I'm sorry to use the word, absolute rubbish or absolute fueling conflict. And on the other hand, what is essential to be known as normal facts and facts that are happening every day. So I leave the intra-religious debate for those who are, sorry for the word, but you understand what I mean, professional religious people, and that's their activity, that's their way of doing and being active in life, and others like what I would call, for the sake of the argument, people who have a religion but who are not clerics or are not mullahs or are not rabbis, the need to really fight misconceptions and fight misunderstandings, and at least draw a clear line between what is a normal practice of a religious belief. The right to religious belief is a sacred right to a certain extent, to an absolute extent in my view, and on the other hand to fight against the unknown, the ignorance that fuels conflicts. And this is where all of us have a role to play, and the fact that we look around this audience here today and one sees or guesses that there are many religious practices here, the numbers that were told at the beginning of this meeting are really very impressive. And so it's not only the pluralistic approach to practice of religion or the right to practice it in public space, but at the same time a pluralistic view inside each religion, and of course trying to avoid dogmatic approaches to religion that sometimes people who are believers keep with themselves, which I think is a tremendous thing to happen. So the reason why I have always a very modest approach to this is that if you go throughout history, and I speak of my own country at this precise moment, I spoke on behalf of my country for 10 years, but that's enough. I speak as a citizen. If you look back to what, for example, happened with several religions, it always comes to me that we did have the Inquisition, didn't we? And then we had the liberation of the Inquisition. We had the expulsion of the Jews, and then the Jews came back, fortunately, etc., etc., etc. So what I try to put forward is, let's look to the future. I mean, we cannot do anything about past history. We can at least reflect on what now we see as terrible mistakes or misgivings or really not beautiful things to have been done or responsible for, but let's look to the future, and future demands that we have an acceptance. I don't want to sound utopian. I'm a very pragmatic person. Being a politician for so many years, you have to be pragmatic, but you have to have principles. You have to have values. And the Alliance stands for fundamental values, which I tried to say what they were, and I'm very happy that those who conceived and were responsible for the launching of this initiative have seen it grow, have seen it developed, and I think that we are confronted now with new demands and new challenges, and I hope we will have the tools to deal with them. But what I wanted also to say is that we cannot do this alone. We have to do this at all levels, and everyone concerned, whatever the place they are in, whatever the company, whatever the workshop, whatever the institute or faculty or activity they are in. This is a general collective concern, because after all, we are dealing with soft powers, and soft powers are more and more necessary for peace. And this, in the end, is a tool for peace, and that is what it's all about. Thank you.
What about the violence which goes for many countries around the world, especially the Middle East country, caused by some religion? Did the United Nations Alliance of Civilization do anything about this violence?
Well, that's one of the main responsibilities of the Alliance at the beginning, when the initial report recommending the creation of this initiative was written and published in 2006. The Middle East conflict was at the core of its preoccupations, and it remains so. But one has to distinguish between what are, what I would say, political discussions and decision-making between the parties involved, and I am personally very sad that we are stuck in terms of negotiations in this respect. And the other is the person-to-person or people-to-people approach, which the Alliance has tried to develop. In other words, instead of waiting for political negotiations to get somewhere, it's one of the reasons which is at the core of the Muslim, so-called West Muslim divide was and is the conflict. So we have to try to deal with that, with this fundamental and basic idea, hoping that a political settlement gets somewhere and peace will come in political terms. There are still 2 or 3 things to be done, and one is how to get across different people in the same or bigger, considering it bigger parts of land. And this, I think, is whatever you can do. Look at the example notwithstanding, but you see conflicts that get solutions and then person to person you still have tremendous problems to solve. I have been witnessing things like that, and I don't think that soft power in the sense of relationship between people, communities, by sport, by artists, by theatre, by cinema, by whatever you can think of, can be avoided if you want really to start working people together of different countries, different states, if, of course, and I hope so, as soon as possible, a political solution is found to that very, very fundamental issue. Thank you.
My question is UN leadership in terms of the divided world, as in the haves and not-haves. Reaching our civilization in the world that we are is, reaching to the convert. The people who need that sort of leadership is the 80% of the world population which have very minimum access to all the access of information that soft power helps. And that soft power to play a role. How would UN looks from now 10 to 20 years that will change? The 80% of the world population that are hardly reaching information, hardly empowered to stand on their feet. And the symptoms that were mentioned about religious wars, poverty, are only symptoms. The main fundamental issue is how these challenges are to be tackled, especially by the United Nations, and the UNHCR is one of the leading on the cause of the civil wars, poverty, and other causes. But how that comes in reverse, UN taking, instead of remedial sort of solutions to the fundamental problems of the 80% of the world population, to stand with us, talking about alliance of civilization. What would be the vision to look to that sort of thing in the coming next 10 to 20 years? Where would we look to stop refugees or stop crisis? Or how would the crisis be faced by the leadership that we always inspire to see UN taking roles? Thank you.
Well, I wish I could fully reply to that very fundamental question. I have a certain idea that in 20 years' time I will not be here. That's clear. And if I will be here by a remote chance, I will have no capacity to be on the podium trying to answer. This is just a side comment. But I would like to say that first of all, the United Nations as a great idea. Second, the very numerous agencies of the United Nations directed to certain kinds of activities, you know many of them. But what I think is a main source of some of these conflicts, apart from territory, water, oil, and everything that one knows of, these things are always there, whether clearly, openly, or disguisedly, whatever you can think of, they're always there. There's one thing which I think is a tremendous challenge, which in our small world of the Alliance we are trying to approach in the Doha Forum, is poverty, and therefore the Millennium Development Goals, and therefore the Declaration of the Millennium. By this meaning that really there is a linkage between the necessity of education and understanding the world as it is today, and the need to fight poverty, and the need to fight a way in which the advantages of dealing correctly with cultural diversity have to be a tool to make advances in the poverty kind of area. And of course, globalization has much to do with that, in the sense that it has produced tremendous results, but it has shown in the last economic and financial crisis that it has so terrifying shortcomings at the same time. One has seen that poverty has diminished, but one has seen the bottom billion, which is poorer and poorer. And so the combination of these policies always ends up in saying, how are you going to educate people? How are you going to have gender progress? How are you going to have women participating in economic development? And there are many examples that this has worked, and it will work, and it will continue to work. How are, in fact, policies going to be directed to alleviation of poverty? It's a big challenge. It's going on at this precise moment in very antagonistic, as you know, ideological debate. In terms of a recession that is more or less coming in here and there, what is the response? Do you have to have austere budgets, or should you have ways of using instruments to develop demand and all that takes with that? And of course, equality in society, equality of opportunities as a standard political agenda issue, which obviously has to come all the time to the forefront of the political, I would say, I would not say political fight, but at least for the political endeavors. So I think dramatically that we will be with this issue. Unfortunately, of those countries who don't have that as so seriously as some others that I have visited, and inequality of resources, inequality of income, inequality of education, inequality of housing, inequality of whatever you can think of, plays a very serious role in fact, instead of bridging the gaps, opening gaps more and making people more apart, and therefore they are a good terrain for the exploration of these misconceptions that I was talking about. So your question, in fact, gives a good direction to where we should be going all at the same time. Unfortunately, that is not the case. Some do it better than others. I wish it gets better all the time, but I'm not sure of that.
Diversity. Can we have the mic to this lady afterwards?
Your Excellency Sampaio, thank you so much for coming over to Australia. I've been privileged. Sure. I've been privileged to serve for the movement of peace for the last 12 years, and at the same time work with the United Nations and other peace organizations from around the world that have made great differences in getting people together. However, what I find is there is a lack of connection in terms of what happens in the area of war machinery and the peace movement. So is the United Nations preparing, plan, or somehow a way to direct some of that money that goes into the war machinery into becoming part of the peace movement, so in that way we can bring solutions rather than continuing with the war movement?
I hope I understood you correctly. I am, thank you very much. I'm a staunch defender of the United Nations, not because I have this initiative at as my responsibility, but there's one thing which I think one should have in mind, and that the United Nations is better or worse, considering that the countries that form it are better or worse in terms of the problems you were saying. So peace can be, obviously has to be a great purpose of the Charter, it is there, and to have an international body that regulates legitimacy in terms of what has to be done in terms of international law and war and peace, etc. It does not put aside the need for every country in the world after the East-West confrontation of the so-called Iron Curtain, and when it came back down in 1991, a new world opened, and a variety of conflicts have in fact come through. So I have the conviction myself that we are facing not only, of course, national problems, national cohesion, social cohesion, as we have spoken before, but we are facing now new sets of problems which demand a multicultural approach, a multicultural solution. Take warming, take climate change, take the energy issue. You cannot achieve any good result if you don't have really a multicultural approach. It's very difficult to get one because interests there play a leading role. And it's no use saying that that doesn't exist. They do exist. They fight for their supremacy, but it's only because that we have to be together in the same world, under the same roof, under the same umbrella, that we have to go forward and try to find a proper solution. So this is why the variety of agencies, the variety of regional capacities, the need for new instruments in the economic field and the financial field. The crisis since 2007-2008 has shown that the 1945-48 instruments are not enough to deal with this extraordinary financial world where in fact you are computing and you can lose billions in 3 seconds. This is something that we institutionally, thinking about institutions to respond to this, they don't exist. It's not possible. And I think we have to work on this and see how this has developed, how this has to be regulated, how can we protect those who are more poor and those who are getting millions by simply clicking and transforming quite an extraordinary operation. Sometimes it goes badly and someone ends up in jail, that's true, but not enough, I would say. But anyway, this is a challenge, whether it's the financial world, the climatic world, the energy world, the food world, the poverty world. All this needs more and more institutions facing the demands and challenges of the 21st century.
Hi, my name is Geraldina Alvarez Poblete. Thank you very much, Mr. Jorge Sampaio, for coming here today and address this event. My question is, how do you see the role of women in the alliance of civilization? One of the things that it was in my mind all this time is that the poorest of the poorest are women. And in the global world, at the moment, still rape is used as a weapon against women, and women are being raped at the moment while we speak. How we're going to transform all of these questions, all of what we're saying, into action? And as a woman myself, and as a migrant that came to Australia many years ago, I need to understand those things before we look at cultural diversity. How we're going to do that, I don't know. I know it's a challenge, but it's a question that we need to answer before, and we need to take a responsibility. That's why I'm here today, because I heard the word global, and this is what we need to, to address, and how we are going to address that. That's my question for you.
Madam, may I be very, very brutal? Not to you, and I thank you for the question. Let's deal with men to begin with. Because we always speak about women and what happens to women. There's dreadful times, what happens. And when we speak about the emerging necessity of having women playing a decisive role, which is my position, we should at least speak, not you, but I'm speaking in general, what on earth are we saying about men and their relationship in this brutality towards women? We normally don't speak about it. We speak about wars, but we don't speak about the rapes that exist in warfare, etc., etc., etc. So it's not only it requires the assumption of this is an extraordinarily important issue. obviously that citizenship to women helps the problem of poverty, as it was, the question was required. You have many examples of bringing in women to develop the economic patterns of their own families, changes the quality of those communities to terribly in the good sense of the word. So that is a challenge that is not only just for women, it's challenges for humankind and human beings in general. And unless we do not have the capacity to denounce and to respond and to trial and to fight for, this difference, apart from all the differences that we know, will be terrifying. And I think that I'm happy that you came because of the word global, because that preoccupation of yours is inside the global, as I see it, and it has to be always remembered, because it's sometimes forgotten, and it is dramatic to forget it. I hope that UN Women, now headed by the former Chilean president, Madame Bachelet, and apart from UNICEF and all that, is an extra point to make these issues as a permanent issue in modern life, and to avoid as much as we can the tragedies that are happening all the time. But my main tragedy, ladies and gentlemen, is war. I mean, war is really a horrific and terrifying thing. No matter the reasons, I think people, in fact, are in themselves absolutely, totally against war. And we should bring this sentiment and try to find the settlement of so many issues and so many problems to the table of negotiations, and see how you can sort it out, whether it's the energy here and the frontier is there, whether it's the territory or the river that's going through this and not through that, etc. You know what I mean by these examples. And I think there's nothing can substitute the need to avoid the suffering, the need to avoid the tremendous things that we see in famine, and not very far away, and the way, in fact, you are reacting to that. All this is terrifying, and we have to keep on really pursuing the proper principles, the proper values, and enlarging them. And going back to one of the questions, and trying to use religion as a faith that everyone has the right to practice, also a right not to practice, but and put it at the service of influencing politics in the good sense of the word, because instead of trying to fuel confrontation, which sometimes happens, try to fuel peace, which I think is the better way to deal with life as such. But I'm thankful that you raised the question, and I'm more thankful that because of the word global you are here and saying what you said. Thank you.
Thank you, and I want to say, my name is Mimi Ngumchi Watts, and it was like as if we were talking to each other. And my question also is about the role of women in peace building and how the Alliance is engaging women, but I would like to direct it towards alleviating poverty. So picking up on the MDGs and how this alliance in Australia is doing that, because when you go to other places, even around Asia, Africa, you hear a lot about MDGs every day on the radio, but here you don't hear a lot of it. So how do we engage the community here to understand that this is what the world is doing and really empower the people to get out there and be involved?
One has to be modest. The Alliance is a very recent idea. It does not substitute the existing agencies and the capacities of the international system as such. I think the MDGs as a challenge for 2015 apply to every country, and each country has to develop their own system, whether it's maternity health, whether it's schools, whether it's, what is written there. But I think that we are now approaching a moment in which evaluation of each country's work and how they have developed and challenge the duties that they in fact approved 15 years before, in the year 2000. And some things have gone quite well, others have gone not that well. And we have to find, I'm speaking in general, the alliance is not a problem solver in the relation to the MDGs. It is, I would say, an agitator in the good sense of the word, putting forward with not many means, but putting forward the need to find a way in which these goals can be obtained and these goals can be reached to. But nothing really substitutes the will of a nation or the will of a state and its components, whether it's local, federal, regional, municipalities, government, etc. And of course, doctors, teachers, professionals of all kinds are or have to be embedded in the need to get to these goals, and if they are not going to be fulfilled as they should be, probably not in some cases, prepare the next step, prepare the next challenge, prepare the next motivation, because the MDGs have, nevertheless, produced some very important results in many communities. They were a flag to be stretched out, and I think this is important. And now that time is going on, we are approaching this deadline. Let's think of something to pursue, and this is one of the reasons why modestly, very modestly, we are trying to see how cultural diversity and the issues related with the governance of cultural diversity can be a tool to help the fulfillment of the Millennium Development Goals, and after that too. So this is something that you can be mobilized by your country, where you are, or by your government, by your civil society organizations, whether it's mother care, whether it's taking care of tuberculosis, whether it's HIV/AIDS, whether it's non-transmissible diseases. All this needs more and more, I would say, involvement of citizenship, because after all, that is where we are. I mean, we are part of the same world. We need to be citizens. We need to be participating not only at the community level, but at the regional level, at state level, national level, and this, I think, is something for the years to come. So I'm very thankful. May I just ask permission to sit down now, because otherwise I will say